I'm a Vietnam vet. It's been years since I set foot in Vietnam, but there's one night, one nightmare that has never left me. It wasn't the firefights or the ambushes. It wasn't the American hostages we were sent to rescue. It was something far worse. The jungle's a living thing. It breathes, it pulses, and it watches you. But that one night, I learned it hides monsters, real flesh and blood monsters. Things that you thought only existed in movies, horror movies. The kind that tear you apart for sport, laughing at the fear in your eyes, laughing even as you beg. There were 5 men in my unit, 5 guys who'd survived the worst the war could throw at us until that night. Our mission was simple. Infiltrate a village deep in the jungle in enemy territory, a rumored prison camp where American prisoners were held. Intel said the Viet Cong ran the camp. Easy enough to understand. But what we found there, no man, not even the most hardened soldier, could comprehend. I can still see their faces, my squad. Billy, the youngest, still full of life. Jackson, the joker who kept us all from losing our minds. Santos, quiet but deadly with a rifle. And Lenny, my second in command, a guy you'd follow to hell and back. We'd fought together, bled together, but I never imagined we'd die together. It was late when we got the call. The POW camp was hidden in a tiny village deep in the jungle, far from any help. Command wanted the prisoners out alive if possible, but we had no illusions. The jungle's heat choked the breath from our lungs as we trudged through the thick undergrowth. No lights, no chatter, just the hum of the jungle and its wildlife, the sound of cicadas mixed with the occasional distant yelp of an animal, or what we thought were animals. Jackson kept making cracks about the heat, wiping the sweat from his brow with that goofy grin. "Feels like hell, doesn't it, Cap?" he whispered. I just nodded, keeping my eyes on the path ahead. We couldn't afford distractions. The deeper we went, the more suffocating the jungle became. It was like stepping into another world, one where the trees leaned in close, like they were trying to listen to our every move. Something felt wrong about this mission, but none of us said a word. We were soldiers. This was our job. We pushed forward. After what felt like hours, we reached the edge of the village. It was dead silent. No voices, no movement, nothing. The intel hadn't said anything about the place being abandoned. "Cap, this doesn't look or sound right," Lenny murmured, squinting through his binoculars. "Where's the patrol? Where's anybody?" I signaled for the squad to spread out and get into position. I scanned the area, and that's when I saw it, the blood. Dark smears on the ground, like someone had been dragged. "Billy, check it out," I whispered. The kid was eager, always the first to step up. He nodded and crept toward the nearest hut. Then we smelled it, the thick, metallic stench of death and blood rot. It hit all of us at once. I tightened my grip on my rifle. "Something's not fucking right here," Santos said, his voice low, almost a growl. "This place, it's just wrong." Billy scouted out the front interior of the village before waving us over, his face pale. We moved in, and what we saw was horrific. It was carnage, dead bodies of Viet Cong soldiers, farmers, even children, all torn apart. Blood and guts soaked the earth. The hut splintered and collapsed as though something enormous had ripped through them. "Billy, what about the American prisoners?" I said. Billy looked at me with a worry in his eyes I'd never seen before. "Sir, they're all slaughtered and dismembered. Something destroyed their holding cells, sir." At first sight, Jackson gagged. What the fuck could have done this? I didn't have an answer. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We'd seen plenty of death, but this This wasn't war. It was a massacre. Bones splintered, limbs torn, faces frozen in terror. And the worst part, no signs of gunfire. Whoever or whatever had done this hadn't used weapons. It used machetes or some type of slashing weapons with claws. Now, our first instincts was that it must have been some rogue Vietnamese military resistance group fighting against the Viet Cong. But it didn't make sense to just slaughter everything in sight. We could understand the soldiers, and even that was a far-fetch considering they'd been ripped apart in the worst way imaginable. But the farmers, women, and children? These people were basically slaves and laborers for the Viet Cong. They were innocent. "We need to move," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lenny shook his head, glancing around nervously. "Dan, I don't like this. It feels like we're being watched." I didn't want to admit it, but he was right. The jungle around us had gone unnervingly quiet. Even the cicadas had stopped. It felt like the trees were closing in, suffocating us. And then we heard it. A low growl. It wasn't a tiger. I knew what those sounded like. This was deeper, more guttural. I scanned the tree line, motioning for everyone to stay low. My mouth was dry, my palms slick with sweat. It wasn't a tiger. "There," Santos whispered, pointing. At first, I didn't see it, just darkness between the trees. But then, the eyes, blood red, glowing in the shadows. Not one pair, 3 pairs, watching, stalking. "Jesus Christ," Jackson muttered, backing up a step. The growling grew louder, more menacing. My mind screamed at me to run, but I held my ground. I had to. "Hold your fire," I ordered. "We don't know what we're dealing with." But it was too late. Before I could stop him, Billy fired a shot into the trees. The crack of the gun echoed, and then all hell broke loose. They came from the jungle, fast and silent, huge, towering over us, 9 feet tall, maybe more. They were covered in matted fur, their limbs unnaturally long, their bodies rippling with muscle. But it was their faces, the twisted, wolf-like snarls, teeth bared in sadistic grins that made my blood run cold. These things weren't animals. They were intelligent. "Open fire," I yelled, raising my rifle. Bullets tore through the air, but the creatures were too fast. One of them lunged at Billy, its claws raking across his chest. Blood sprayed, and Billy screamed, dropping to the ground, his body convulsing. "Billy, no," Lenny shouted, firing wildly. One of the creatures snapped its head toward him, eyes gleaming with malicious delight. It moved in a blur, swiping Lenny's rifle away like it was nothing. It grabbed Lenny by the throat and lifted him off the ground. It slowly started digging its claws into Lenny's chest. Lenny screamed and pulled out his knife, stabbing it in its shoulder. The dogman snarled and threw Lenny across the jungle like a stuffed animal. Lenny hit a tree with so much force I swear I could hear his bones shatter from the impact. Santos fired, hitting the creature in the side. It howled. It seemed like the bullets didn't faze it much. It turned toward Santos, its eyes pierced through his soul. It began walking towards him, stalking him like prey. Jackson was shouting something, but the words were lost in the chaos, like his mouth was moving in slow motion. One of the creatures lunged at him, its claws slashing through his abdomen. His scream was cut short as it grabbed him by his lower jaw and ripped it from his face. Jackson fell to his knees, eyes wide and gurgling blood. The dogman dug its claws into his eyes, then deeper into his brain, killing him on the spot. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My squad, my brothers, were being torn to pieces, and I was powerless. I snapped out of my paralysis just in time to see Jackson's body hit the dirt, lifeless. His blood soaked the ground, seeping into the earth beneath him, feeding the jungle that had just claimed his life. My instincts kicked in. I dove behind one of the huts, my mind racing, adrenaline pumping through every fiber of my being. Santos was still out there, firing shot after shot at the creatures, but they barely flinched. I could hear his panicked yelling, his boots crunching the underbrush as he tried to reposition. I peeked around the corner, and that's when I saw it. The largest of the 3 dogmen stalking Santos, playing with him like a cat with a mouse. It crouched low, its muscles rippling under its thick, matted fur. The red glow of its eyes pierced through the darkness, locking onto Santos, who was desperately trying to reload his rifle. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what was about to happen. "Santos, fall back!" I shouted, but it was too late. The creature pounced. With terrifying speed, it was on him, knocking him to the ground with a force that made the earth tremble beneath my feet. Santos let out a strangled cry as the thing pinned him down, its massive claws digging into his chest. His rifle clattered to the ground, useless. I couldn't watch, but I couldn't look away either. The beast lifted its head, baring its blood-stained fangs, and let out a guttural snarl. Then, it lowered its face to Santos's throat. With a sickening crunch, the creature's jaws closed around Santos's neck. I heard bones snap, and then silence. Santos's body went limp, his lifeblood pooling beneath him. I screamed, raising my rifle and firing wildly. The bullets ripped through the air, some hitting the beast in the back. The creature stood up slowly, its crimson eyes locking onto me. It tilted its head like it was amused, as if this was all just a twisted game to it. It let out a low growl, and then, without warning, it began to walk upright towards me. I scrambled to my feet, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breaths came in shallow gasps. Behind it, the other 2 creatures circled the remains of my squad, their massive forms blending into the jungle shadows. They were waiting for their turn, for the thrill of the chase to begin. I knew I couldn't outrun them, but I had to try. I bolted into the jungle, my boots sinking into the damp earth as I sprinted through the dense foliage. Branches slapped against my face, thorns tearing at my skin, but I didn't care. All I could think about was putting as much distance as I could between me and those things. Behind me, I heard the creatures crashing through the jungle, their growls growing louder, more frenzied. They were hunting me, not just to kill, but to enjoy the terror they were causing. I ran harder, my lungs burning, my legs running as fast as they could. I could feel the weight of their presence behind me, feel the heat of their breath on the back of my neck. They were close, too close. I stumbled over a fallen log, crashing to the ground, my rifle slipping from my hands. I scrambled to grab it, but before I could, one of the creatures was on me. I felt its claws rake across my back, the pain blinding, searing. I cried out, rolling onto my back, and stared up into the glowing red eyes of the beast. It loomed over me, its breath hot and rancid, its fangs glistening in the moonlight. It could have killed me right then and there, but it didn't. Instead, it leaned in closer, its eyes locking onto mine, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. Intelligence. This thing wasn't just a mindless killer. It knew exactly what it was doing. It knew the fear it was causing, and it was enjoying it. With a snarl, it raised its massive claw, ready to strike the killing blow. I braced myself for the end, but then something unexpected happened. There was a loud crack, a gunshot, and the beast jerked back, howling in pain. Blood sprayed from its shoulder, and it staggered away from me. I looked up, dazed, trying to figure out what had happened. That's when I saw Lenny. He wasn't dead, Not yet. Somehow, he'd managed to grab Jackson's rifle and fire a shot at the beast. He was on his knees, blood pouring from a wound in his chest, but he was still alive, still fighting. "Go, Dawn," he rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Go now." I hesitated for a split second, torn between staying and helping my friend and running for my life. But the look in Lenny's eyes told me everything I needed to know. There was no saving him. He was already dead, and he knew it. With a heavy heart, I turned and ran, leaving Lenny behind. I heard him fire another shot, followed by the savage roar of the beast. And then, silence. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I tore through the jungle, every muscle in my body screaming in agony, my wounds burning, my mind barely holding on. The pain was overwhelming, but fear kept me going. The thought of those things catching me, of ending up like Billy, Santos, and Lenny, it was enough to drive me forward. After what felt like hours, I broke through the thick underbrush and found myself at the edge of a river. I was tired, but I couldn't stop. I waded into the water, hoping it would mask my scent, hoping it would slow them down. Maybe it didn't like water or wouldn't bother swimming after me. As I stood there, chest deep in the river, I realized something terrifying. The jungle was silent. No growls, no footsteps, nothing. They were watching me, waiting. I spun around, searching the tree line for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive weight of the jungle closing in on me. I could feel their eyes on me, feel their anticipation. And then, from the shadows, one of them stepped forward. Its red eyes gleamed in the moonlight, its teeth bared with a look of anger in its menacing eyes. I raised my pistol from its holster. My hands were shaking. I could barely keep the barrel steady. The creature took another step forward, and then another. I squeezed the trigger, firing off a shot. The bullet missed, striking a tree behind it. The beast let out a low, mocking growl, as if to say, "Is that the best you've got?" My mind scrambled for a plan, any way out of this nightmare. But there was nothing. I felt cornered, standing in that river, alone, and they knew it. The river's current tugged at my legs, pulling me deeper as I stood frozen, my pistol trembling in my hands. The massive dogman on the riverbank took another step closer, its glowing red eyes narrowing with cruel intentions. The other two dogmen slowly appeared beside it, watching from the shadows, circling just beyond the tree line. They moved like predators, silent and calculating, their hunger for the kill palpable. But they weren't in a rush. It was like they were playing with me, like I was some helpless animal caught in a trap, waiting for the final blow. I backed up slowly, deeper into the river, my boots slipping on the moss-covered rocks beneath the surface. The cold water sent a chill through my body, but I barely noticed. My mind was locked on the towering figure in front of me. Suddenly, the dogman lunged in the air at me. Its movement was so fast, I barely had time to react. I squeezed the trigger, the sound of the gunshot echoing across the water, but it was too late. The beast was on me before I could even register if the shot had landed. Its massive claws swiped through the air, knocking the pistol from my hands and sending me crashing backward into the river. Water splashed over me as I struggled to stay upright, my vision blurring from the impact. The creature loomed over me, splashing, snarling, its breath hot and foul, its eyes burning with human-like hatred. I kicked out, trying to push myself away, but the beast's claws wrapped around my leg, dragging me toward it with terrifying strength. I could feel its nails digging into my ankle, the pain sharp and searing. I reached for my knife, my fingers slipping on the wet handle as I drew it from my belt. With a desperate scream, I slashed at the creature's arm, the blade cutting deep into its fur-covered flesh. It howled, a sound that made my ears ring, but it didn't let go. Instead, it tightened its grip, pulling me closer, its jaws opening wide, revealing rows of jagged, blood-stained teeth. For a split second, I thought that was it, but I was done for. I could feel the hot breath of the creature on my face, its teeth inches from my throat. But then, out of nowhere, a loud crack echoed through the jungle, followed by a sharp whistle. The dogman recoiled, yelping in pain as something struck its side. I blinked through the haze of fear and confusion, trying to figure out what had just happened. That's when I saw it, a crossbow bolt buried deep in the beast's ribcage. From the edge of the riverbank, a figure stepped out of the shadows. At first, I couldn't make out any details, just the silhouette of a man, but whoever it was, they had a crossbow aimed directly at the dogman. "Get down," the man shouted, his voice rough and commanding. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled back into the river, throwing myself down into the water just as another bolt whizzed past, striking the creature square in the chest. It let out another roar, its claws releasing their grip on me as it staggered back toward the trees. Blood oozed from the wound, staining the water around it. The man fired again, this time hitting the beast in the shoulder. The creature let out a deafening howl, then turned and bolted into the jungle, crashing through the underbrush with terrifying speed. The other two dogmen, sensing the shift, vanished just as quickly, melting into the darkness as if they'd never been there. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the uneasy calm that comes after a storm. My breath came in ragged gasps as I lay half submerged in the river, my body aching from the battle. I tried to pull myself to my feet, but my legs felt like jelly, trembling from the adrenaline and pain. The man with the crossbow was already by my side, grabbing me under the arm and hoisting me up. He wasn't much taller than me, but he moved with a confident, practiced efficiency. His face was lined with age, his eyes sharp and wary. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. My head was spinning, and every inch of my body throbbed with pain, but I wasn't dead. Not yet, anyway. "Who the hell are you?" I managed to croak, still trying to catch my breath. "Name's Tom," he replied, scanning the tree line for any sign of the creatures. "You're lucky I was nearby. Those things don't usually let their prey live." Tom pulled me toward the riverbank, his gaze still darting around, as though he expected the monsters to return at any moment. I wanted to ask more, but my mind was still trying to process what had just happened. Who was this guy? And how the hell did he know about those things? We moved quickly through the jungle, the darkness closing in around us as the night deepened. The sounds of the forest had returned, the distant hum of insects and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But it didn't bring me any comfort, not after what I'd just seen. Those creatures, those dogmen were still out there, lurking in the shadows. As we walked, I tried to make sense of it all. What were those things? I asked, my voice shaking. They weren't human. They were like wolves, but bigger, smarter. Where did they come from? Tom didn't answer at first, his eyes scanning the path ahead. "Dogmen," he finally said, his voice low. "Been hunting these things for years. They're old, older than this war. Some say they've been here since before humans ever set foot in these jungles. Some say they're the failed experiments of the fallen angels that fell to this earth. Some even say they're demons straight from hell, trapped in this physical realm to devour human flesh for eternity." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "How do you fight something like that?" He glanced at me, his expression grim. "You don't. Not unless you know exactly what you're doing. They're stronger, faster, and a hell of a lot smarter than anything you've faced before. They hunt in packs, and they hunt rogue. It's not just about food for them, it's about the hunt." I shuddered, remembering the way those red eyes had looked at me, the twisted grin on the creature's face as it tore through my squad. "They killed my men," I muttered. "All of them. And they seem to enjoy it." "They do," Tom said simply. "You're lucky to be alive." We continued through the jungle, the oppressive heat of the night pressing down on us like a heavy blanket. My mind was still reeling, and the pain from my wounds wasn't making it any easier to focus. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of my squad torn apart by those monsters. And now, I was running through the jungle with a stranger, hunted by the same creatures that had killed them. We reached a small clearing, and Tom motioned for me to follow him into a narrow cave entrance hidden behind a thick wall of vines. Inside, the cave was dimly lit by a small fire, and there were supplies scattered around: ammo, weapons, even food and water. This wasn't the first time Tom had been out here. "Rest," he said, gesturing toward a worn sleeping mat on the ground. "You'll need your strength if you're going to survive this." I collapsed onto the mat, my body aching and my mind racing. I didn't know if I'd make it through the night. I barely slept that night because every creak, every rustle in the dark sent my heart racing. Even with Tom standing watch, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The jungle outside the cave was alive, but it wasn't just the normal sounds of wildlife that kept me on edge. I could feel those red eyes on me, lurking just beyond the shadows. At dawn, the air was thick with humidity, and the heat was already oppressive. Tom nudged me awake, handing me a canteen. "Drink," he ordered. "We need to move." He threw me an M16 assault rifle, and with rounds. "Move where?" I asked groggily, taking a long swig of the warm water. "Farther into the jungle," Tom said. "We can't stay in one place too long. They'll track us." "They?" I asked, my throat tightening. "How many more of those things are there?" Tom shook his head. "Too many to count. There are at least 3 in this pack, but there could be more nearby. We've got to be smart if we want to make it out of here alive." The memories of my squad's brutal deaths still fresh in my mind. Those things had torn through trained soldiers like they were nothing. And now it was just me and this stranger, running blind through the jungle, hoping to survive against monsters that shouldn't exist. As we moved deeper into the jungle, Tom kept glancing over his shoulder, his hand never far from the crossbow strapped to his back. He was calm, methodical, and experienced, someone who had faced these creatures before and lived to tell about it. But even with him leading the way, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a second skin. "How did you end up out here?" I asked, trying to distract myself from the oppressive silence of the jungle. Tom didn't answer for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I was with a squad, just like you, long time ago. We were stationed here during the war, on a search and destroy mission deep in the jungle. We never expected to find what we did." He paused, his eyes scanning the treetops for any sign of movement. "We stumbled across them by accident, same as you. My whole squad, they didn't make it. These things tore them apart, piece by piece, just like they did to your men. I barely made it out alive." I could hear the pain in his voice, the haunted edge of someone who had lived through unspeakable horror. "So why stay here? Why not leave this place behind?" Tom glanced at me, his eyes hard. "Because they don't stop. They don't stay in one place. These things, they're spreading. And if someone doesn't stop them, more people are going to die." I hadn't considered that. Hadn't thought about what would happen if these creatures found their way out of the jungle and into populated areas. "How do you stop something like that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom's expression darkened. "You don't stop them. You survive them. That's all you can do. As we trudged through the dense undergrowth, the jungle seemed to close in around us. The air grew heavier, the foliage thicker. The further we went, the darker it became. It was as if the trees themselves were trying to keep us out, trying to smother us in. We reached a clearing just before midday, and Tom motioned for me to stop. He crouched down, studying the ground carefully. "Tracks," he muttered. I knelt beside him. I saw the deep claw marks gouged into the earth. They were fresh, too fresh. "They're close," I whispered. Tom nodded grimly. "They've been following us. They know we're here." "What do we do?" Tom stood slowly, scanning the tree line. "We keep moving. Stay quiet, stay alert." We pressed on, our footsteps almost silent on the soft jungle floor. It wasn't long before the feeling of being watched intensified. I could almost feel their breath on the back of my neck, smell the stench of blood in the air. I glanced at Tom, but he kept his eyes forward, his expression hard as stone. Without warning, the jungle around us erupted in a frenzy of movement. I barely had time to register what was happening before one of the creatures burst from the underbrush, hurtling toward us with terrifying speed. Its eyes were wild, gleaming with malice, its fangs bared in a snarl that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. "Run!" Tom shouted, but I was already moving. We sprinted through the jungle, dodging low-hanging branches and thick vines, the sound of the creature crashing through the foliage behind us. I could hear its growls, the heavy thud of its paws pounding the earth. It was gaining on us, fast. Another dogman leapt from the side, forcing me to swerve hard to the right. I fired off a burst of shots from my M16, but it barely slowed it down. These bastards were built like tanks and relentless. Tom was ahead of me, his crossbow in hand. He spun around fluidly, firing off a bolt that struck one of the creatures square in the chest. It howled in pain, but kept coming, blood dripping from the wound as it tore through the jungle like a freight train. We broke through the trees and into another clearing, a wide stretch of jungle with nowhere to hide. I skidded to a stop. My heart sank as I realized we were cornered. "They've boxed us in," I shouted. Tom didn't answer. He was already turning, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. But it didn't take long for the dogmen to appear. One by one, they stepped out of the shadows, revealing themselves. 3 of them, the same 3 that had slaughtered my squad. They spread out, surrounding us, their massive forms blocking any chance of escape. The largest one, the leader, I assumed, stared at me with those hellish eyes, its lips curling into a snarl. "They want to break us," Tom muttered, raising his crossbow. "But they'll never fucking break us." I nodded, raising my rifle. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to focus. This was it, the final stand. The leader growled, its claws digging into the dirt as it crouched, ready to pounce. Then, in an instant, it leapt. Tom fired his crossbow, the bolt flying straight into the creature's shoulder, but it barely slowed. I fired too, the bullets ripping through the air, but they were like pebbles against a tank. The beast slammed into Tom, knocking him to the ground. I fired again, hitting the beast in its shoulder and leg. The other 2 creatures were closing in, their jaws snapping, their eyes filled with murderous glee. Tom struggled beneath the creature's weight, blood pouring from a gash in his side. I tried to reach him, but one of the other dogmen lunged at me, forcing me back. Its claws swiped at my chest, slicing through my camo and into my flesh. I screamed, stumbling backward as the pain ripped through me. My rifle dropped out of my grip in the process, leaving me defenseless. They were toying with us, just like before. They could have killed us in seconds, but they were savoring the fear, the pain. It's like the flesh tastes better when fear and adrenaline is marinated through it. just as the creature was about to rip me to shreds, I heard something from the trees. A sound that didn't belong to any of the dogmen. A fourth figure stepped out of the shadows, even larger than the others. Its eyes weren't red, but glowing an amber yellow color. The dogman pinning Tom down let go of him and moved toward the other dogman. Tom Quickly Bear crawled towards his crossbow and ran towards me. The dogmen stopped in front of me, their snarls fading as they turned toward this newcomer. There was something different about it, something that made even these monsters hesitate. "Tom," I whispered, clutching my rifle. "What the hell is that?" Tom was staring, just as transfixed as I was. The new creature's growl rumbled through the air, its eyes locking onto the leader of the dogmen. And then, with a burst of speed I couldn't comprehend, it lunged. The new creature exploded from the shadows, its massive form a blur of fur and muscle. The three dogmen, who had just moments before been toying with us, suddenly tensed, their snarls turning into something more like whimpers. I didn't understand it at first. The sheer size of this thing was monstrous, even compared to the dogmen that had slaughtered my squad, but there was something more than just size. It was dominance. This creature wasn't just another dogman. It was something meaner, more vicious than them. The pack leader, the one that had been stalking me, bared its fangs, a growl rumbling deep in its throat as it turned to face this new threat. I could see it, the hesitation in its movements, the uncertainty. The three creatures that had hunted me like an animal suddenly looked like they were facing something they feared. The newcomer with glowing amber eyes lunged at the pack leader. Claws collided with claws, jaws snapping as the two beasts clashed in a storm of fur and blood. The other two dogmen circled around them, unsure of whether to join the fray or retreat. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The creatures that had ripped through my squad, that had hunted us with such twisted glee, were now on the defensive. And this new beast, it was unlike anything I had ever imagined. It moved faster than the others, its muscles rippling with raw power, its snarls deeper, more commanding. I used this opportunity to grab my rifle quickly off the forest floor. "Tom, what the hell is that thing?" I gasped, clutching my rifle as I staggered back, trying to stay out of the way of the fight. Tom, still clutching his wound, wiped the blood from his mouth. His eyes were wide, filled with a mix of awe and fear. "I don't know," he whispered, "but it's not one of them." The giant dogman slammed into the pack leader, its massive jaws closing around the other creature's shoulder with a sickening crunch. The leader howled in pain, thrashing wildly, but the alpha didn't let go. Blood sprayed across the clearing as the two monsters tore into each other, the sounds of their snarls and roars deafening in the jungle's oppressive silence. I took a shaky step back, my hands shaking as I fumbled to reload my rifle. I wasn't sure if shooting at this new creature would even help, or if it would only piss it off and set its attention on us. But I wasn't going to just stand there and wait for it to decide we were next on the menu. The other two dogmen watched the battle with a kind of animalistic caution, their glowing red eyes darting between the alpha and their leader. They were confused, maybe even scared, but I knew it wouldn't last. Eventually, they would either join the fight or turn their attention back to us. "Tom, we need to get out of here," I hissed, grabbing his arm and trying to pull him to his feet. He winced, his face pale from blood loss. "We can't stay here." Those things. Before I could finish, one of the other dogmen let out a furious snarl and charged toward us. My heart lurched into my throat as I raised my rifle, firing off a shot that struck it in the neck and chest. It stumbled, but didn't stop, its eyes blazing with rage. I fired again, this time aiming for its head. The bullet struck true, and the creature's skull snapped back, its body collapsing to the ground with a heavy thud. They can be killed. The second dogman hesitated, its eyes flicking between me and the brutal battle still raging between the alpha and the pack leader. For a moment, it seemed torn, whether to attack or flee, but then, with a low growl, it backed away into the jungle, disappearing into the shadows. I let out a shaky breath, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. I'd killed one of them, but I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The fight between the alpha and the pack leader was reaching its climax. The leader was bloodied, its fur matted with gore, but it wasn't going down without a fight. It raked its claws across the alpha's chest, drawing blood, and for the first time, the alpha let out a pained snarl. But the alpha didn't relent. It reared up on its hind legs, towering over the pack leader, and brought its massive claws down with devastating force. The leader let out a final, agonized roar as the alpha's jaws closed around its throat. With a savage twist, the alpha snapped the creature's neck, the sound echoing through the clearing like a death knell. And then, silence. The pack leader's body slumped to the ground, lifeless, its red eyes dimming to nothing. The alpha stood over it, breathing heavily, blood dripping from its jaws. It turned its head slowly, its amber eyes locking onto me and Tom. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The alpha's gaze was piercing, extremely intelligent, like it was measuring us, deciding whether we were worth its time. I tightened my grip on the rifle, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. To my shock, the alpha did something I didn't expect. It looked at me and Tom and grunted. It stepped back, its massive form melting into the shadows of the jungle. It didn't attack, it simply left. I stood there, stunned, unable to process what had just happened. The alpha had killed the leader of the pack, saved us, but why? Why hadn't it torn us apart like the others? Tom let out a shaky breath beside me, his legs giving out as he slumped to the ground. I dropped to my knees next to him. "We need to get out of here," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Before it comes back." I nodded, though my mind was still spinning. What the fuck just happened? Tom shook his head weakly. That thing, it wasn't like the others. It was different. "I don't know," Tom muttered, wincing as he pressed a hand to the deep gash in his side. "But I think we just saw something we weren't supposed to." I helped Tom to his feet, my body protesting with every movement. We didn't have much time. The alpha had spared us. Why? I didn't know, but we couldn't count on that mercy lasting forever. As we stumbled through the jungle, the weight of what had just happened settled on me like a lead blanket. My squad was gone, ripped apart by creatures I barely understood. And now, there was something even more terrifying out there. Something that could kill these monsters. Something that was even more dangerous than the Dogmen themselves. We didn't speak much after the alpha left. There wasn't much to say. My mind was still reeling from the encounter, from the brutality of the pack leader's death and the way the alpha had just left us. I couldn't understand it, and that lack of understanding gnawed at me. What were these things? Why did it let us live? I kept expecting to hear the growl of one of the dogmen or the rustle of something moving in the underbrush, but there was nothing. As we pushed forward, my thoughts drifted back to my squad. Billy, Santos, Jackson, Lenny, their faces flashed in my mind, each one a reminder of the brutal deaths they had suffered at the hands of those monsters. My heart ached with guilt. I had survived when they hadn't. I tried to push the guilt down. I couldn't shake the images of their torn bodies, the fear in their eyes as they were ripped apart. The way those creatures had seemed to revel in the violence, in the sheer terror they caused. "Don," Tom said, snapping me out of my thoughts. He was staring ahead. I followed his gaze and saw what he was looking at. Just beyond the rise was a dirt road half hidden by the jungle. We could even spot a few American convoy vehicles driving by. "We can make it," Tom said, his voice filled with grim determination. "Just a little farther." We moved as fast as we could, the weight of our exhaustion dragging at our limbs. The road was only a few hundred feet away, but it felt like a mile. We reached the dirt road and collapsed together in front of an American patrol team and convoy truck. They found us delirious and half dead, babbling about giant wolf men in the jungle. They didn't believe us, of course. How could they? But I know what I saw. I know what's out there. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Descent into the Unknown for more horror content. If you have any real cryptid encounters, or you're a horror writer wanting to share your stories, please feel free to email me in the description anytime.